This video is a long time coming. Since the very beginning, viewers have been asking me whether I am autistic, and I know many of you are on the spectrum. I have not been diagnosed with autism. However, after 20 years of treatment, my therapist, who does not diagnose, finally told me she thinks I may be non-neurotypical. Thanks for letting me know. At my age, I don't really see the point in getting a diagnosis because what difference would it make at this point? However, if you've watched my channel long enough and heard my eternal frustration with nonverbal communication in the workplace, it definitely sounds like I tick almost all the boxes for autism spectrum disorder. After having educated myself about autism, I think my therapist and your assessment is on the nose. Yep, this is me. Most of the neurodivergent population is autistic. However, neurodiversity also includes learning disabilities like dyslexia, dyscalculia, and dysgraphia, as well as ADHD. I use the term non-neurotypical because that was my therapist's wording, and she's the professional, so I'm just going to go with that. However, for the purposes of this video, I'm going to use non-neurotypical, neurodivergent, and autistic interchangeably. So this video is for you if you know or think you are non-neurotypical. Again, a lot of you already have a diagnosis. Now, most of you are probably neurotypical. Sometimes you are just a quote-unquote normal person who just so happened to stumble into a viper's nest of cluster B psychopaths, sociopaths, and narcissists, and you got eaten alive. You have some positive quality that makes you shine, and y'all just got a bunch of hating ass haters. It's just jealousy, period. If that is you, this video may not be for you. However, you might want to watch if you think someone you know, like for example, the people who bullied you, might be on the spectrum. Again, I am not a psychologist. I have no education in special needs, and I am certainly not an expert on autism. When I decided to do this video, I had to cram a lot of research and go down the rabbit hole, and I consistently found parallels and overlap with phenomena that I do understand, like narcissism, borderline, introversion, CPTSD, and even empathy. And the result was a rather thorny mixed bag that I find very difficult to unpack. This video is entirely my completely uneducated and unprofessional opinion, allegedly for entertainment purposes only, based on my own very limited personal experience, and I don't want to offend anyone. So if you are on the spectrum and you think there's anything that I get wrong or need to add, please let me know. Now, what does autism have to do with workplace bullying? A lot. A white paper from a couple of years ago found that non-neurotypical people are way more likely to get bullied in the workplace than neurotypical people are, for 3 reasons. First of all, autistic people at work tend to be very high performing. What have I been saying all along? Workplace bullying always targets the best and the brightest. Workplace bullies always target the star of the workplace. High performance just attracts a lot of jealousy and envy, which is what workplace bullying is all about. Conversely, some autistic people may also be very low performing for reasons that I will explain. Poor work performance also attracts bullying, and the difference manifests in the type of bullying. High performing employees are more likely to be subjected to covert bullying. All of the sneaky, passive-aggressive, underhanded machinations that take place behind the scenes, like spreading gossip, rumors, and lies about you, muttering insults under the breath at you, and going through your stuff when you're not there. Low-performing employees are more likely to be the target of more above-board bullying, like outright screaming and yelling, overt name-calling, and even physical violence. So if your workplace bullies are up to a whole bunch of shady stuff, I guess take it as a reverse compliment. They think you're really good at your job. At the same time, autistic people tend to have very poor social skills. Bingo! High work performance plus low social skills. Perfect, perfect, perfect target. That is the ideal combination. If you are good at the work but not good at the game, you will get a target on your back from day one and you will be eliminated. I guarantee you, trust and believe. Again, workplace bullying has nothing to do with work. It is the cult of personality. Personality trumps productivity every single time, regardless of the profession. The survivors in the workplace are always the ones who emotionally labor the most. They can be mediocre and incompetent, but they kiss a lot of ass and they grant a lot of supply. It doesn't matter how good your work is. If you do not participate in the ego games, you will be targeted. Finally, autistic people can have a direct communication style that some would call blunt, and that can rub people the wrong way. The bullying of autistic people is a vicious cycle, again, for 3 reasons. Not only are autistic people more likely to be bullied in any environment, not just the workplace, but because of their extreme sensitivity, autistic people are also more severely impacted by the bullying than neurotypical people are. They may be less resilient and less able to bounce back fully from the bullying, resulting in cumulative permanent damage to both their mental and physical health, which only attracts more bullying because abusive people target people with pre-existing weaknesses. Finally, studies show that autistic people who come forward about workplace bullying are also less likely to be believed than neurotypical people are. Autism is basically an anxious personality style. Autistic people can present with a lot of anxiety, which reads as nervousness, which the great unevolved conflate with dishonesty. Autistic people may exhibit some of the same stereotypical behaviors as people who lie, like not making eye contact, perspiring, and fidgeting. The workplace bullying of autistic people is so pervasive that the unemployment rate of autistic people in the United States comes in at a whopping 85%. Autistic people are also more likely to be physically and sexually assaulted. Most people can't live without employment. So if they don't get support from their families, I imagine that the majority of autistic people end up homeless or they commit suicide. If you don't have a diagnosis, how do you know you are non-neurotypical? In general, undiagnosed autism manifests as this lifelong pattern of chronic difficulty in all interpersonal relationships, not just in the workplace, for reasons that I will explain. Remember that autism is a spectrum, so it comes in degrees. I have met autistic children who really had no capacity at all to interact with other human beings and would probably be institutionalized for life. At the other end of the range, some autistic people may be very high functioning, capable of full-time work, relationships, partners, families, and parenting. This is usually what we called Asperger's until 2013. I believe that Asperger's has kind of been incorporated into the general autism spectrum and is now just considered high functioning autism. However, some people in the community still like to use that term. In my research on autism, I kept running into that same bipolar binary opposition that keeps showing up in my life for some reason. Autism is like a pendulum that swings from one extreme to the other. So while some autistic people may exhibit a characteristic, other autistic people may exhibit the complete opposite. You know you are autistic because everyone bullies you, even the people who claim to love you, like friends and family members who make fun of you and talk about you behind your back. I believe that the most common bullying techniques employed against autistic people are ridicule, harassment, and snubbing. And I have individual videos on each of those. People with autism are used to being ridiculed everywhere they go. I'm almost 50 and I get it to this day. There is just this soundtrack of canned laughter that follows me everywhere I go. I can't walk through the grocery store without people making fun of me. People usually laugh at my physical presence alone. The minute I walk into a room, before I have a chance to even say anything, I still don't know what it is about my physical appearance that is so funny. Some autistic people may experience so much ridicule in their lives that they actually develop an irrational fear of it, called gelatophobia, which sounds like Italian ice cream. At this point in my life, whenever I so much as hear laughter anywhere in my environment, even if it's outside my door when I'm sitting at home alone, it sets off alarm bells. My nervous system goes on high alert and I almost jump out of my skin. Autism comes from the Greek word for self, and autistic people tend to be very self-focused. They are not necessarily antisocial or introverted, but if people cannot be kind to them, like anyone, they would rather be left alone than bullied. However, anytime you give off the energy of wanting to be left alone, you attract sadistic people who mess with you because they know they can upset you. And that's where the harassment comes in. Autistic people may also experience a lot of ostracism and exclusion. You don't get invited to stuff. Non-narcissistic, neurotypical people may just kind of slowly distance themselves from you. They're not mad and they're not hurt, they just don't understand you. In my adult life over the years, I think I've lost at least a dozen friends, most of them women, who ghosted me because of my condition. If you are an undiagnosed autistic adult, your life is basically a living hell. You may also get a lot of name calling. The most common insults for autistic people are weird, strange, awkward, and my personal favorite, freak, along with its very colorful variations. Ladies, if a man ever calls you a freak, let me go ahead and translate that one. It's just more sexual wishful thinking, if you know what I mean. Crazy in the bed, crazy in the head. And some people may go so far as to use the R word, which I will never say. You might be autistic if you have always felt your entire life like an alien who doesn't belong here. You don't speak human. You have tremendous difficulty understanding other people, and they have difficulty understanding you. You feel like an anthropologist in this world, and you have to expend an overwhelming amount of time and energy trying to figure out why people are the way they are. You may also be unable to shake this chronic nagging sensation that other people want something from you, but you can never figure out what it is. If you have ever wanted to scream at a person or a group of people, "What do you want from me?" you might be autistic. At the same time, you may believe that you are the one who is normal and everyone else is crazy. Because of all the bullying you've experienced, you may have become a shut-in, a loner, cut off and isolated from the rest of the world in your own private personal hermit mode. You may have come to believe that the world is a terrible, hostile, dangerous place full of people who are shitty, cruel, and mean. You may go out of your way to avoid other people with behaviors that only inspire more ridicule, like insisting on taking the stairs instead of the lift. You may be avoiding other people because you are particularly sensitive to rejection. Nobody likes rejection, but your abandonment fears are off the charts. You may not like to be around large groups of people like crowds, malls, or parties. At the same time, you may experience a lot of loneliness and longing for connection. You may not have any friends, but wish you did. However, anytime you interact with other people, you feel stifled and trapped, as though you are holding your breath. You may feel that the only moments of genuine happiness in your life are when you are alone, because that's when you can relax, breathe, and be yourself. As a result of spending so much time alone, you may have cultivated a very rich, full inner life and be very creative and imaginative. Because you have so much difficulty with interpersonal relationships, you may have social anxiety, even with people you like and trust. You may experience frustration with traditional, everyday, commonplace social mores like small talk. Small talk may be so painful for you that you feel as though you are being flayed and boiled alive, and you would rather drive a railroad spike through your face than sit across the dinner table from most people. If you have ever brainstormed topics of conversation and even gone so far as to write them down in advance of a social gathering, you might be autistic. You may have created a fake persona by mimicking other people's personalities. You may unintentionally say things that offend other people. People may have called you rude, harsh, too honest, and of course, blunt. As a result, you may have just stopped talking and fallen silent. You may have difficulty regulating your emotions, and you may be prone to both meltdowns and shutdowns. You may get easily overwhelmed and just feel tired all the time. You may have poor coping skills and have difficulty self-soothing. You may experience difficulty with verbal communication, both oral and written. You may despise reading and writing and go out of your way to avoid them. Other people's jokes just go over your head, and your own humor may be inappropriate, off color, or just corny dad jokes from hell. On the other hand, you may be hyperlexic and excel at language, especially in written form. Even if you are a good writer, you may still struggle with oral communication. You may be overly literal and not understand subtext. You hear the words, but you don't understand the meaning behind them. Other people may make fun of the way you talk. You may have a habit of interrupting people, or you may not respond at all. You may ask too many questions, or you may just check out with maladaptive daydreaming and be accused of not being interested in the people around you. And they're right. You probably aren't. You may not like to be told what to do. You may insist on doing things differently in your own way when there's really no good reason to. Other people may have called you rigid, inflexible, stubborn, unyielding, or unwilling or resistant to change. You may have a habit of not applying lessons learned, which leads you to experience the same things over and over again. You may be prone to black and white thinking, such as either idealizing or demonizing someone. You may hate uncertainty and change. You may like structure, routine, and repetition. You may be overly attached to your daily routine, and you may have developed personal habits that have become ritualistic. And if there's any disruption to your daily routine, you may get extremely upset. Other people may have wrongfully accused you of OCD, and you may have restrictive behaviors like with money or food. You may do weird stuff with your food. You may have had full-blown eating disorders and or self-harming behaviors. As a result of not really being in touch with your body, you may be clumsy, uncoordinated, and accident-prone. You may have some passion, hobby, or special interest, probably some kind of STEM subject that consumes you, even to the point that it bothers other people. You may be obsessed with a subject or even with a person. It may be the only thing you can talk about. You may be really good at one thing or some things, but totally sucky at everything else. You may struggle with problem solving. You may find it difficult to prioritize or multitask. You may be perfectionist and procrastinate a lot. You may have a keen eye for detail, but miss the big picture. You may be over-prepared. You may be unable to do anything unless you have everything planned out in advance. You may find it difficult to focus, and you may engage in repetitive behaviors that other people find odd to soothe your anxiety and help you focus. You may experience hyper or hyposensitivity to both external and internal sensory stimuli. like lights, noises, textures, smells, and tastes. You may not like to be touched, and you may find direct eye contact extremely uncomfortable. You may have inconsistent sleep, like irregular bedtimes, and you may sleep anywhere from 4 to 13 hours. So those were some indications that you might be neurodivergent. Let's talk further about the characteristics of autism. So I'm pretty sure the first indicator is the language problem. Sometimes, but not always, autistic children start speaking and or reading at a later age. There's a developmental delay. So if your parents are still around and you're still in contact, you might ask them if that was you. Some autistic people may hate reading and writing and will do anything to avoid them. But because of that pendulum swinging from one extreme end of the spectrum to the other autistic people, on the other hand, may excel at language and be highly verbal. Some autistic people may prefer written over oral communication because they interpret language literally. Oral communication comes with a lot of nonverbal cues like tone, facial expression, and body language that autistic people just can't understand. Because autistic people often cannot understand nonverbal communication, often they don't know when it's appropriate to speak and when not to, especially in group settings. So you may annoy other people by talking too much or not talking at all. It's something I call the Goldilocks style of communication. And by the way, inventing your own terms for stuff is an autistic trait. You just can't get it right. Everything you say is wrong. Nothing you say is right. It's like an accordion. You keep swinging from one extreme to the other, but can never find the right balance. You may speak too quickly and interrupt people. Or there may be a considerable delay while you process the information and evaluate how to respond, because autistic people also like to plan. And often, by that point, it's too late. I had a habit of interrupting people well into my 30s. I did that for two reasons. Number one, because I'm intuitive, I kind of already knew what the other person was going to say. And number two, it was my dysfunctional way of asserting agency, of taking back some of my power, because my life up until that point had been so disempowering. Eventually, I figured out that that was rude and other people don't like that. So I stopped speaking altogether. And we all know what happens if you do that. If you're quiet, especially if you're physically attractive, then you're arrogant. I have been called out for not responding to your comments in a timely fashion. I try to respond to as many of the longer comments as possible so that I can get some words of support and encouragement back out to you. I read everything you write, and I always leave a heart so you know that I read it. But it can take me days to respond, and that's because I'm thinking about the best way to respond to you. And that's part of the perfectionism and over-planning that are characteristics of autism. When you speak, you may be stoic, monotone, or even non-responsive, and other people may call you robotic. Or if you're a language nerd like me, you may use what I call stilted language, which is overly formal, with an over-adherence to strict grammatical rules and a lot of big SAT vocabulary words that most people don't really use when speaking. Stilted language can sound professorial, and you may be misinterpreted as talking down to people. Full disclosure, I actually keep a table in my notes of Gen Z slang that I find online for use in my video scripts so that I can sound relatable. If I didn't do that, this channel would sound like a dissertation. And you may have noticed my excessive use of synonyms. Because I have a larger than normal vocabulary, I know a lot of synonyms, but I can never decide which one to use. Indecisiveness is a problem with executive function, another characteristic of autism. So I just use all of them. And I think it is an overly literal interpretation of language that can make some autistic people overly direct or blunt. Bluntness in astrology is Sagittarius, if you're interested, the great truth teller. So understandably, the language problem is going to lend itself to difficulty in interpersonal relationships all across the board, not just in the workplace. What is the foundation of all relationships? Communication. So a lot of autistic people learn to do something called masking, which I'm not sure I fully understand yet, but I think is pretty much exactly as it sounds. You may have actually cultivated some kind of false persona and alter ego for use in public, especially in the workplace. And you may have done it by mimicking other people's personalities. I have observed this in my high-functioning dyslexic students. They are unfailingly charming and personable, impeccable social skills. Their personalities compensate for their learning deficit. At a certain point, I think most autistic people learn to master the basic commonplace pleasantries that constitute the everyday give and take of society, like greeting people and faking facial expressions to express concern or surprise or friendliness or interest. But that's about the best that you can do. So even though autistic people are capable of emotional and intellectual depth, conversations with them can be pretty superficial. Masking is not sustainable. You can only keep up appearances for so long. Personally, because I'm so used to putting my foot in my mouth, I've learned to basically just tolerate other people's monologues and contribute as little as possible. Everyone calls me sweet, and I have been called meek. And that passivity is very attractive to narcissists who want to trauma dump. Another hallmark characteristic of autism is the special interest. Autistic people know how to really go down the rabbit hole and master a subject at a PhD level. This is the idiot savant type. It's usually some kind of STEM subject like physics or astronomy because they're so technical, but music is a common one too. It's rumored that Mozart had Asperger's. And so is linguistics, which I think is essentially music because it's the study of how the human body creates sound. And the special interest can even be a person. This is celebrity stan culture. You know, these people who have like an entire room in their house devoted to memorabilia about Elvis or Marilyn Monroe or these days Taylor Swift. I mean, I like Taylor's music, but I don't buy any of her shitty merch. For example, the worst student I ever had in my life was a 10-year-old boy with both Asperger's and ADHD, and he was really into dinosaurs. A little boy who likes dinosaurs. Shocking, I know. Most little boys have their plastic dinosaurs, and they kind of know some of their names, but this kid was a walking encyclopedia of information about every single kind of dinosaur that ever existed, where their fossils were found, what they ate, how they behaved, when they lived, just everything. And he did what a lot of autistic people do. He assumed that I was just as interested as he was in his hobby, and he spent hours monologuing me about it while I couldn't get a word in edgewise. My passion is obviously astrology. When I first got into astrology, I proselytized a little bit too, but I quickly figured out that other people don't like that. So now I just assume that no one cares about astrology and I never talk about it. I'm also really into language. I know a lot about language, and I spend a lot of time thinking about these two interests. And I know exactly what I'm doing. It's an avoidance tactic. My interests give me something to do and something to think about besides the epic shit show that is my life. Sometimes when I descend into the ruminating about all of the abuse, I deliberately distract myself by pulling up astrology videos and articles and charts to divert my attention. Mastering a subject to the level of depth that autistic people are capable of takes a tremendous amount of focus, and that's because on the inside, there actually isn't a lot of focus. The neurodivergent mind can be quite chaotic. Again, autism is an anxiety condition. A lot of autistic behaviors are essentially attempts to quell that anxiety. When you feel out of control on the inside, you look for something outside of yourself that you can control. Focusing intensely on one subject is basically a self-soothing behavior. In other words, when autistic people focus, they really focus. And that's why they tend to be high performers in the workplace. When they are in their element, they know a lot about their area of expertise. They're really good at what they do, and they have an incomparable work ethic because they are so hyper obsessively focused on the work, not on the people around them. But not always, and this leads us to the next characteristic of autism, the spiky skill set. I presume spiky is intended to mean the opposite of well-rounded. Some autistic people are really good at the thing that they like and not so good at everything else. I don't know if it's because they can't do anything else or they just don't want to. I distinctly remember sitting in 7th grade thinking to myself that I hated math and science and I wasn't even going to try anymore. I then basically half-assed my way through the remainder of my STEM classes and have no idea how I was able to maintain a good GPA. I can't even do econ. But when it came to anything that had anything to do with language, I was all in. I kept detailed, elaborate grammar and vocabulary notebooks with multicolor charts and graphs and tables. This is the extremism that I was talking about, black or white, all or nothing, either or. I always used to tell my students, you don't have to be good at everything. You do, however, have to be good at least one thing in your life. I had no idea that was actually my autism talking. I think the spiky skill set in part is why autistic people can be both overestimated and underestimated in the workplace. If you have been hired in your area of expertise, you excel at it. Employers notice your competence, and because they are greedy capitalistic pigs who exploit people and spread them as thinly as possible to avoid the expense of additional hires, they pile on additional responsibilities, even some that are not in your original job description and that you may not be good at. If, however, for some reason you have been misplaced out of your element and your greedy capitalistic pig employers are too cheap to spare the expense of additional training, you're not going to be very good at the work, and you're going to attract a lot of overt bullying, like people who call you stupid because they can't understand how you think. They're like tacky American tourists who are too lazy to lift a finger to acquire a foreign language and who think if they just scream English loudly enough at people, people will automatically understand them. Another reason autistic people are both over and underestimated at work is the language problem. This is another thing I always tell my students. Look, people judge you according to your use of language. Fact. If you speak well, if you write well, you'll get the job, and then everyone will bully the shit out of you. People with poor language skills may not necessarily be unintelligent, but everyone thinks they are because, again, everyone judges everyone according to their use of language. Language is only one form of intelligence among many. People who do not speak well and do not write well may in fact be highly intelligent with above average IQs. It's just that their intellect is developed in other areas. Some autistic people may also exhibit something called pathological demand avoidance, or PDA. No, I'm not talking about celebrities in the tabloids, which is something that I also don't fully understand yet. But basically, you do not like to be told what to do. Autistic children can be very obstinate and difficult. They can really dig in their little heels until they get their way. Now, by the time you reach adulthood, you have probably figured out what you need to do. You obey laws, drive the speed limit, wear your seatbelt, pay your taxes, and fulfill the responsibilities of daily routine like cleanliness and hygiene. And at work, you do everything they tell you to do. But you may have found alternative ways to be rebellious. I think the word demand can be better expressed as expectation. When people approach autistic people with some kind of initiating energy, that can feel like a boundary violation, and it can cause additional anxiety. A good example would be a handshake. Autistic people already do not like to be touched, but when another person extends a hand, again, that is initiating energy, and it can feel violating. In another example, whenever anyone in public tries to let me pass in front of them, either on foot or in my vehicle, I don't like it. So I go out of my way to avoid it. I will turn around, walk in the opposite direction, move around cars and people to place myself behind them, and even stay in my parking space until all the other cars have left. And I really hate it when strange men try to hold open doors for me, because I know the only reason they do it is they want to check out my ass as I walk through. Yes, you totally do. Don't even approach me with your lying ass. I also do the opposite of what is expected of me emotionally. Most of the time, I have no idea what other people want from me. But if I sense the specific emotional response that the other person is looking for, like they need validation or sympathy, or they need me to be on board with their stuff, or they need me to laugh at their jokes, I will deliberately refuse to deliver the expected emotion. I look away or change the subject. I have a real problem with being needed. I despise being approached with needs. And this has cost me some relationships. Because of their distaste for being told what to do, autistic people may also insist on individuating, differentiating, and doing things differently in their own way, even when there's no good reason to do so. Now, I love individuality and embrace change. There is a lot that is not working in this world, and we need innovators to rethink things. Vive la révolution. But there's no need to waste creative energy on reinventing the wheel. For example, when I first started tutoring, the agencies I worked for had timesheets and invoices that I had to submit, and they would send me their templates. But I would go home and redesign them just because I felt like it. Was it a waste of time and energy? Yes. I still don't know why I did it. Autistic people are also prone to rigidity of thinking. They like structure, order, routine, and repetition. They are emotionally attached to their daily routine, so much so that if there is any disruption to it, they get upset, and they may have created elaborate rituals around it. As a result, they may be misdiagnosed with OCD. It's my understanding that sufferers of OCD do just that. They suffer. It's like, I don't want to do this, but I can't stop. The C in OCD stands for compulsion. There are people who are very clean, neat, and organized because it brings them great joy. A psychiatrist once said to me, I hesitate to diagnose you with OCD because you seem to really enjoy it. Autistic people may have rituals around food or money, for example. You don't have to have a full-blown eating disorder like binge eating or bulimia or anorexia to still have disordered eating. Autistic people may eat the same thing over and over and over again, or they may restrict by eating only foods of a certain color, for example, and they're still deprived. I'm not interested in food or the physical body, and I actually never get hungry. I eat only perfunctorily, just because I think I should and it gives me something to do. I don't eat breakfast, but I eat the same thing for both lunch and dinner. And I do that for 3 or 4 months until I switch to something else. I've been like that for decades. Daily routine in astrology is Virgo or 6th house if you're interested. If you have strong Virgo or 6th house energy in your chart, part of your purpose is to cultivate joy in daily routine. I've written and spoken before about how much I love cleaning, and I have my entire life organized down to a science. I literally have a cleaning schedule that I have actually written down. And though I don't make very much money, I can always organize it. I have elaborate rituals around my financial records, both on paper and electronically. I feel like every year I invent some new way to be cleaner and more organized. Last year I figured out how to clean my kitchen wall grout. Girl, bleach and a toothbrush. Is it wrong that I was so proud that I wanted to take a picture of it and put it on social media? And if anything goes wrong, for example, if the Wi-Fi goes down because there is an electrical outage, I can really lose my shit. Anyway, I know exactly what I'm doing. It's an anxiety coping mechanism. It's how I make sense of the chaos that has been my life. It's also a byproduct of my loneliness and my boredom. I'm self-medicating. Another characteristic of autism is poor executive function. Again, it's an anxiety condition, and in the absence of focus, it can be chaos. This can look like poor time management skills, as well as an inability to problem solve, make decisions, prioritize, and multitask. As a result, some autistic people can be perfectionist, again with that laser focus on their special interest. However, the perfectionism can be so excessive that it results in stagnation and paralysis. Autistic people may learn to overplan instead of taking a leap of faith and embracing happy accidents, Bob Ross style. For example, I've been wanting to write a book my whole life, but my perfectionism prevents me from even getting started because I believe I have to have the whole thing already written in my head before I can even begin to put pen to paper. Autistic people may also struggle with decision making because they feel overwhelmed by information overload. Indecisiveness in astrology is Libra. I'm a Libra rising. If you are autistic, you are probably the kind of person who reads menus online before going out to eat. As a result of their problem with executive function, autistic people can be tardy and procrastinate, and they get gaslit as lazy as a result. Did you know that both tardiness and procrastination are actually symptoms of perfectionism? Procrastination is, if it's not perfect, I'm not going to do it at all. And people who are chronically late are actually overachievers. They're doing too much. They have to complete all of their elaborate rituals before they can even get out the door. It's also their social anxiety that's holding them back. Because of all the anxiety and the overwhelm, autistic people may also have problems with multitasking. But psychologists say that multitasking is actually just inefficient. I think multitasking is some kind of abusive gaslighting that was invented by greedy capitalistic pig employers who, again, want to spread people too thinly. It's always best to just focus on one thing until completion and then move on. Poor executive function may be a byproduct of sensory overload. Autistic people can also have this unique hyper or hyposensitivity to both external and internal sensory stimuli. Bright lights, loud noises. I have definitely observed this in some of you that I have worked with. If you can't have a telephone conversation with someone because their dryer is running in the other room, that's not normal. Because autistic people can be so easily distracted, they can come across as very controlling. And I think this is why autistic people really do not like eye contact. I have been making eye contact ever since my debate teacher in junior high called me out on it, but I still don't like it. And I think this is also why autistic people do not like to be touched. You may react negatively to sensations on the skin, like the feeling of water or the tags in your clothes. Just as autistic people may be overly sensitive to sensory input, They can sometimes be non-responsive, like not running the thermostat when they should, for example. And the same goes for internal needs like bodily functions. Hypochondria comes to mind. For example, I have a rather disgusting habit of always blowing my nose, even when I don't need to. I broke my nose when I was 13, and I live in a subtropical climate where everyone has allergies. And I always have paper towels with me. I don't like tissues. And I just have this habit of constantly blowing my nose, even when there's nothing there. On the other hand, autistic people may also ignore internal physical needs, like not going to the bathroom when they need to. Because of all the anxiety, autistic people can have difficulty self-regulating, and they can be prone to emotional overload or overwhelm, which results in both meltdowns and shutdowns. Meltdowns look like histrionic personality disorder, and shutdowns look like the silent treatment. If you've ever experienced the autistic shutdown, it's shocking. You have no idea what caused this person to just completely close off, but the autistic person is aware that there was a trigger. Often, again, it's some kind of demand or expectation. I think it's like a pressure cooker. Neurotypical people probably use other people to emotionally regulate. Gossip is a societal anxiety release. But because interacting with other people is literally the source of their anxiety, autistic people can't do that. So their emotions just accumulate internally until they explode. Another form of anxiety release in autistic people is stimming or self-stimulation. And no, I'm not talking about masturbation. I don't want to hear anything pornographic. This is some kind of repetitive motion that autistic people do, usually with their hands. The most common example is the hand flapping that we see in autistic children, or it could be something as banal as twirling a pen in their hands. I just had lunch with an autistic friend, and he was visibly shaking throughout the entire conversation. I asked him if he was cold or nervous, and he said no. That's just what he does. When I was a child, I sewed a lot, quilting, embroidery, to keep my hands busy while I was watching TV. These days, I've developed a habit of shuffling my new tarot card deck, again, to keep my hands busy. And I'm doing daily tarot card readings over on Facebook if you'd like to join me. Other autistic people may stem with elaborate grooming practices like excessive nail maintenance or depilation. I have a habit of sitting and straightening my hair for hours while I watch YouTube, even when I don't need to. I know that it's a self-soothing activity for me. And some autistic people may self-harm, which I believe is a form of stimming. Self-mutilation sounds violent and gory, but not to the people who do it. People who self-harm report that they feel better after they do it. It's an anxiety release. I still self-mutilate somewhat, and I have enough self-awareness to know what I'm doing. When I'm doing something particularly strenuous, I tend to pause in the middle of the activity and self-harm, and it calms my nerves. And I think that self-harm is also almost a twisted way of asserting bodily autonomy, which is very important to autistic people, as are all forms of independence. So those were some of the characteristics of autism, and you can understand how someone like that would attract bullying in the workplace. I believe that the causes of autism remain unclear, but I believe that the brains of autistic people scan differently than those of neurotypical people, especially in the parts of the brain that govern language. And that's why autistic people are more likely to be men than women. Women typically excel at language. Women like to talk. That's why women dominate in verbal professions like teaching and writing. Most of the interpreters at the UN are women. Men tend to excel at spatial reasoning, which is part of an IQ test. Like, what would this pile of blocks look like from the other side? That's why we see more men than women in engineering, for example. And autistic people can obsess over physical objects. Based again on my own very limited personal experience, I can see how sometimes autistic people may be the children of narcissistic parents. Do not come for me. I didn't say that if you have an autistic child, that means you're a narcissist. I didn't say that. I said sometimes. For example, the parents of the 10-year-old with Asperger's and ADHD were both absolute monsters. Horrible people. It makes sense. Narcissistic parents cannot meet their child's needs and they can't attach. Children have to attach to something. So naturally, the child of narcissistic parents just attaches to himself or to the objects in his immediate physical environment and meets his own needs. Narcissistic parents are also very controlling. So understandably, their child would have a problem with authority, which is where the PDA comes in. Since we are all still learning about autism, I imagine a lot of people on the spectrum, like me, get misdiagnosed with depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, eating disorders, OCD, borderline personality disorder, and yes, NPD. You have someone who exhibits no or variable empathy, is wearing a mask, and is emotionally dysregulated, oppositional, perfectionist, controlling, and superficial, prone to emotional outbursts, as well as the silent treatment. Where have we heard that before? I know my ass is so getting dragged for this. If you are autistic, I am not saying you are narcissistic. I didn't say that. Do not come for me. Am I saying that there is the potential for overlap? Yes. Statistically, there is no correlation between autism and narcissism, but pretty much anything can be comorbid with anything. I have worked with some bullies who were very clearly neurodivergent, and they were some mean ass mofos. And the 10-year-old with ADHD and Asperger's was a sociopath in the making. Again, hurt people hurt people. The abused become the abusers. You don't need me to tell you that there is a very high profile situation happening right now in geopolitics that is a perfect example of the abused becoming the abusers and doing to other people exactly what was done to them. They learned from the best and they have become what they despise. It can happen globally or it can happen personally. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Workplace bullying is revenge of the nerds. Workplace bullies are people who were bullied, and autistic people are very likely to be bullied, and they just couldn't handle it. They crossed over to the dark side. They chose the left-hand path. You can let life break you or you can let it soften you. What's the difference? I don't know. One of us took the red pill and the other took the blue pill. Autism and narcissism are not correlated, nor are they identical. Like I said, there is some overlap. It's kind of like a Venn diagram. I think the differences are, number one, narcissists are very dependent on other people for supply. People with autism, which comes from the Greek root for self, are much more independent. In fact, other people are usually just a source of anxiety for autistic people, whereas narcissistic people tend to focus on other people. Autistic people tend to focus on objects. That's why they have the ritualistic, structured, ordered, repetitive routines that we typically don't see in narcissists. Another difference is that though conversations with both narcissistic and autistic people can initially be superficial, with narcissists, it just never gets deep. Because autistic people have that special interest, they can achieve an astonishing level of depth just in their area of choice. Narcissistic people typically don't have that special interest and don't go deep with anything. Also, narcissists are highly manipulative. They can be defined sometimes by so-called narcissistic charm or charisma. They do have enough people skills and, yes, empathy to be able to read other people and work out what makes them tick, namely what their insecurities are, which they then exploit to their advantage. In order to do that, they need to have some level of linguistic skill and some measure of EQ to be able to manipulate and play mind games with the power of suggestion, subtext, and innuendo. Autistic people typically don't understand nonverbal communication well enough to be able to pull that off. And autism is not introversion. Both autistic people and introverts spend a lot of time alone. But in introverts, it's voluntary. They love their alone time. That's how they recharge their batteries. Introverted people are perfectly capable of having relationships and even families. They can do a crowd, they can do a mall, they can do a party every now and then. They may not like it very much, but it doesn't kill them. And then they retreat and withdraw back into their own personal, private hermit mode to detox before they get back out there again. Autistic people report intense feelings of longing and loneliness despite their solitude. It feels like forced isolation. Again, because of so much difficulty in interpersonal relationships, autistic people may have come to believe that the world and most of the people in it are unsafe. Though they would like to connect, they are afraid to even try. What all of this sounds like to me is a need for control. Again, autism is an anxiety condition with the hyperfixation on the special interest, the obsession with routine, the not liking to be told what to do, the distaste for eye contact and physical touch. All of that to me sounds like someone who is trying to medicate an internal emotional reality that is out of control by rigidly ordering his or her external physical environment. Maybe instead of control, I should say autonomy or independence. Whenever you have a need for control, that's really a desire for freedom. I think autistic people are people who just want to be free. The great freedom-loving signs in astrology are Sagittarius and Aquarius, so that would be 9th and 11th house. But man is a political animal. We are social beings. No man is an island. We are all built for interconnectedness and interdependence with other human beings. But autistic people tend to view other people as impediments to their freedom. They don't find other people liberating. They feel trapped and encaged. So you have a need for relationships combined with a need for freedom. That's a conflict of interest. So that's going to create this borderline push-pull energy. Borderline is come here, come here, come here. Now go away, go away, go away. I am the kind of person who will ask you for advice and then deliberately not take any of it. Borderlines are like that so that they feel in control of the dynamic. And it's not deliberate, it's completely unconscious. So the question is, how can I reconcile my desire for connection with my need for space? And I think that you do it the same way that you heal from narcissistic abuse. You cultivate emotional freedom. You feel free inside your own spirit. What autism really screams to me is traumatized empath. Psychology is all very well and good, but my beef with psychology is that because it is so slavishly desperate for acceptance from mainstream academia, it rejects all spirituality outright. It is possible to find therapists who practice in accordance with your belief system. There are Christian therapists and Jewish therapists, etc. There is a relatively new field called parapsychology. Parapsychologists understand astrology and past lives and energy and all things metaphysical, paranormal, and supernatural, but most psychologists ignore the spiritual component of the human experience, which is missing a huge part of the picture. That's like trying to solve a murder without a body. I believe the spirit world is very real and it is around us all the time. No, it is not Sky Daddy leaning out of the clouds. If you were aware of all the entities that are around you at all times, you would be like, I am never going to the bathroom again. And it's not all love and light. Human beings have been caught in the crosshairs of a great cosmic war between good and evil since the beginning of time. You can't have one without the other. You can't know the light unless you've been in the darkness. For example, if you were to travel to some part of the world where people can still see what the night sky really looks like without the pollution, like Patagonia or Chile or someplace like that, you would see a lot of stars, but you would also see a lot of darkness. The spirit world is kind of like that. Again, an empath is just a person with piss poor spiritual boundaries. Technically, every living thing on the planet, including animals and plants, is psychic. We all have the power to communicate telepathically. It's just that most of us get our intuition beaten out of us in childhood because there are a lot of people, namely narcissists, who are very threatened by intuitive people because they do not want to be seen for what they really are. Also, if all of the answers have always been inside of you the whole time, that weakens the power of external sources who want to be the false gods in your universe and who depend very heavily on your dependence. Empaths are simply people who have retained their sensitivity instead of killing it off as narcissists have. Empaths are simply more susceptible to outside interference from both the living and the not so living, if you know what I mean. Kids and animals are always natural empaths. If your child is screaming about a monster on the other side of the room, if your dog is barking at figments, if your cat is staring at greebles, those are interactions with the spirit world. And people who are naturally more intuitive than most kind of look like a lighthouse in the spirit world, and they attract even more of that activity. The two primary indicators of mental illness, and no, autism is not a mental illness, but it is a disorder, in astrology are Mercury in Aquarius, that would be me, and Mercury in Pisces. Why? Aquarius and Pisces are the final two signs of the zodiac, which represents the natural progression of the human life cycle, all the way from toddler Aries to spiritual Pisces. So these two signs are the closest to the spirit world. Aquarius, the eccentric, represents all things ET. Our favorite Aspie, the illustrious Senior Musk, has North Node in Aquarius, and he literally wants to colonize Mars. And is it just me, or is that man actually fine as fuck? Girl, only reason I'd kick him out of bed would be to fuck him on the floor. Not me objectifying men. And Pisces, the fish with no exoskeleton, is so connected to spirit, it is essentially not here anymore. Pisces rules all things hidden, invisible, and unseen, like the spirit world. So people with these placements are overexposed to excessive interference from the non-earthly realms. At the risk of sounding crazy, too late, I know, I really believe that most of the so-called crazy people in this world are actually sensitives who simply couldn't handle their sensitivity because they never got any training. A lot like the medium in the movie The Sixth Sense, who commits homicide and suicide because he can't handle his ability. There's no Hogwarts School of Magic. Autistic people do exhibit some of the same behaviors that unhealed and untrained empaths do. It's not that autistic people don't like other people, they just don't like sick people. Neither do empaths. We're both sick and tired of absorbing other people's crap. Both empaths and autistic people suffer from terrible anxiety, and that's just a mirror reflection of the external energies that they are subconsciously picking up on. They feel invaded and violated by energies that they may not be fully aware of and struggle to understand. As a result, both empaths and autistic people are prone to overwhelm. If you've ever come home from an interaction with other people and wanted to immediately pass out, you've just had your life force drained by predatory parasitic vampires. And both empaths and autistic people are also prone to shutdowns. There is even something called empathic shutdown. I think, unless I just made that up. And the not making eye contact thing just screams empathy to me. I make eye contact if I have to, but I still hate it. I feel like when I make eye contact with someone, I absorb that person's energy. And most people's energy is, quite frankly, disgusting because they have no spiritual hygiene. I believe a lot of autistic people are so cerebral, they will reject my theory outright. But I think that if autistic people can reframe their disorder as a spiritual condition, it might help. Recognize the reality of the spirit world and your vulnerability to it. Cultivate some kind of daily spiritual practice, perfect for people who like rituals. Soothe your anxiety with a regular mindfulness practice like meditation instead of cleaning and organizing. Focus on protection, grounding, and cleansing on a daily basis. Shore up your spiritual boundaries with prayer. Cleanse off and return to sender all unwanted energies like your life depends on it, and maybe reach out for training, mentoring, and coaching from more seasoned professionals. Above all, get out of your headspace and back into your heart space and pour cement into your foundation. Fill your own cup. The stronger and more solid you are in your own identity and your boundaries, the less painful it is to interact with other people, even people who are sick. Because of all the bullying non-neurotypical people face in the workplace, there is a movement to encourage employers to hire autistic people because of the remarkable gifts they have to offer this world, not the least of which is their incomparable work ethic and performance. Autistic people are ideal employees for employers who actually care about the work. Autistic people tend to actually focus on the work, and they excel at it because they are perfectionists. You won't see autistic people taking 3-hour, 3-beer lunches on the organization's dime at the most expensive restaurant in the most expensive zip code so they can sit on their asses and trash talk their coworkers. Also, with their astonishing ability to hyper-focus and deep dive into subjects that they like, autistic people have a lot to offer academically. And because they spend a lot of time alone, autistic people tend to be very creative and imaginative, and they can make great contributions to the arts. What I like most about autistic people is the direct communication. I'm not calling for rudeness. If your wife asks you, "Do I look fat in this dress?" you might not want to respond directly if you don't want to sleep on the couch. I am, however, calling out manipulation. When I think of all the time and energy narcissists waste on mind games, it blows my mind. If you have something to say to me, how about you say it to my fucking face? Say it with your chest. And stop wasting my fucking time with all of this fluff and fuckery. I'm the Queen of Swords. That's why you watch my channel. You know I slice and dice through all the bullshit. Seeing as how, I don't know, we probably have less than 2 years to get it together on climate change, and the whole world is literally on the brink of World War III, don't you think it might behoove us to get our heads out of our asses, stop using other people as dildos to emotionally regulate our petty egos, and focus on what really matters in this world? And above all, autistic people serve as a reminder of the importance of individuality, independence, autonomy, and self-reliance. Like, for example, bodily autonomy, which is literally in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, is Basic Boundaries 101 and is currently under threat. Like, if other people do not want to be touched, then you don't need to touch them. Like, stop touching me. Yes, we are all interconnected, but maybe instead of running around all day, every day, trying to control other people so you can extract supply from them, how about you try what autistic people do? Focus on yourself. look in the mirror. Autistic people represent a refreshing departure from the very dangerous groupthink and hive mind that is responsible for the proliferation of evil in this world. To me, autism is be the change you want to see in the world. It all starts with the self. I hope that helps. Take care.